15-0 national champions, so I guess they deserve a little talk. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking up the Clemson Tigers. Got Pigskin Pete on the line, so certainly check out his YouTube channel. Again, it's Pigskin Pete right here on YouTube. Dare I ask, Pigskin, how you doing today?
I'm amazing and fantastic. Everybody's favorite Clemson football YouTuber here, depending on who you ask.
We'll go take a poll and let you know where we stand, but we'll weed out the other votes, and I'm going to make sure that you come out ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we heard from Dabo Swinney. We heard from a couple players at ACC Kickoff. Two things came to mind in listening to them, or I guess there were two comments made that stick with me in my mind that run along the same theme, and that's kind of a subdued arrogance. I will put it that way. Dabo Swinney actually made reference to Trevor Lawrence's prowess and the rest of his career at Clemson, and I just think it kind of gushed out of him in regards to not basically thinking of his opponents in such a way that it sounded, but basically saying, hey, it'd be great, and I wouldn't mind seeing him win all of his games, and he retires undefeated at Clemson. One of the offensive linemen, I forget, I think it was Isaiah Simmons, was there making a comment about basically we hit the field. We know as long as we're on our game, we're going to dominate whoever's in front of us. It just seems as though Clemson has gotten to a place where Dabo in the past has basically said, even after winning championships, hey, we're playing from a certain place. We're still the underdog. I don't feel like that premier elite program, but now maybe the transitions occurred.
Yeah, I think that Dabo Swinney, you said it kind of gushed out of him like an accident. I think that was not an accident that he said that. I think that was because what you've been seeing out of Dabo Swinney for the past several years that they've been in the playoffs is him taking the high road and, us, the little old Clemson, the underdog. And, a lot of people out there doubting that they could continue the success that they had. So I think that was, listen, it was his way of taking a shot without really taking a shot at the rest of the media and the rest of the country.
Yeah, so basically, whether it was his appearance on ESPN or what he had to say from the podium or anything else you gathered from Dabo, what seemed to be the themes? I don't know that he necessarily hits these media days in the same manner that Nick Saban does, who always has an agenda. And I say that in a positive way because it's typically not about his team or anything concerning what he's trying to promote because he's not in the position where he needs to gain any more attention to his team. But it's usually something concerning the players or the good of college football, the good of the game, the good of the SEC, that he certainly hits the podium with an agenda. And you know that it's not necessarily going to be something that he wants to recant the rest of the season, but he's basically making a statement. This is where I stand on this social issue concerning college football, and this is the way it should be. Does Dabo approach it like that, or is there anything in particular that you heard out of him that seemed to be I want to bring this point across?
I think that he's taken a different approach this year. I don't really think he had much of an agenda. I think what he expected to do this year was a lot of defending of the ACC, which he's done a lot of in the past. And he did a little bit of that. But I think more what he did this year was just sort of the normal coach speak that you hear. And that's really what you see. We wait all year as college football fans for these media days. We're starving for football. And every year I hype myself up for these media days, thinking that I'm going to hear a coach say something that gets me going. But at the end of the day, it's just more coach speak. They're really there in a defensive manner, trying not to undermine their message or their program or their recruiting. And so I think that what Dabo did this year was, I think he really just went there and had fun because why not? At the position that they're in, he doesn't really need to defend the program at this point. It's all about just having fun and, taking his little jabs here and there like he did with the Trevor Lawrence comment.
Yeah, from an expectation and disappointment standpoint, it's almost like spring football. I get geared up for these spring football games, and you would think I would learn my lesson by now, but I've missed football so much for 4 months that I hear, oh, spring football games. I'm going to watch the spring football games. I'm going to just really soak in these spring football games. Yeah,
Now, as far as
I watch them agonizingly.
As far as the ACC media days, believe it or not, as a Clemson fan, I was not looking forward, the most to hearing Dabo Swinney speak because I didn't expect anything out of him. But what I was really looking forward to is the 4 head coaching changes that took place in the ACC: Louisville, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and Miami. Because I think, ACC has been the whipping boy this offseason, and they deserve to be. Last year was atrocious. But I see the future of the ACC as very bright. I think that all 4 of these schools that made head coaching changes hit home runs. Now, Georgia Tech, that was something that probably should have taken place a few years ago. But anyway, it took place now. But they got themselves a guy in there who's a Georgia Tech guy. And finally, for the first time in 10 years or so, Georgia Tech will be able to at least try to compete and steal some players from Georgia and South Carolina and Clemson in that region for recruits. Now, it's an uphill battle for them. It's going to take a few years. Obviously, Mac Brown is brought into North Carolina to turn that thing around. And then, in my opinion, he will most likely become athletic director or something and turn the program over to a younger, more up-and-coming coach. Manny Diaz fits the identity and the personality of Miami, and he's probably in the best position out of all these new coaches to have more immediate success based on the state of the division they're in and just the fact that he's going to have some continuity there. He knows the program. He knows the players. And Scott Satterfield coming in Louisville, they couldn't have picked a better guy as far as I'm concerned. Now, Louisville is in really bad shape right now, so they're going to take a couple of years to get back on track as well. But I think that the state of the ACC, looking at maybe not 2019, but 2020 and beyond, is they're in a good spot. So I'm extremely excited for that.
Pigskin, I hate to agree with you. I would like to strike up a nice debate about conference rankings or where the conference stands, but I'm right there with you. I do not think it's going to be a banner year for the ACC in 2019. I believe it was arguably the worst conference out of the Power Five in 2018, certainly because of Clemson's prowess. I gave it the edge over the Pac-12, but I think the Pac-12 was much deeper at a decent range with the Stanfords and Oregons and those schools. So arguably the worst conference, and I believe I rated it 4th. I believe I had it 4th out of 5. But long term, in terms of Florida State's going to get better, Miami's going to get better, and just flat out where the conference is located means much. And they're in a good position with the coaching hires. I am in favor of all of them, as you are, and you certainly stated it in a manner that I would and have in the past in terms of where ACC football stands. But when Syracuse is the second best and second seed in the conference, as they were in 2018, that's typically not a good sign. And it wasn't for what we saw out of ACC football, losing all sorts of non-conference games during the regular season. The record was atrocious against the other 4 conferences, and then that carried into postseason, except for one team in particular. And they did have their random wins. Virginia had a nice showing in the bowl game against South Carolina. Of course, Syracuse beat a undermanned West Virginia team. Duke had a couple nice non-conference wins as well. We got Pigskin Pete on the line. You got to join his YouTube channel and his Clemson football coverage. So I've got all sorts of ways in which I could lean this conversation, but I got to go to the live chat and defer to the folks out here because I have asked for comments and questions, and we'll start with DeAndre. DeAndre, thanks so much for the contribution. So I just want to point out that the delivery of the best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football is right here. We believe each and every day. So just respond accordingly and understand that again, I've had these discussions in the past. Maybe I will in the future very soon in regards to building the brand, the channel, and our vision. And if you catch sight of that vision, as I believe DeAndre has, and I know that he has, that you understand $1, a $2, you're not going to miss. But the collection of the close to 12,000 subscribers, then it means something, and we can make this enormous. Anyway, all right, let's get to Clemson football. The tight end position, Pigskin, is something that's been well recruited and manned in the past, but it's very much been under the radar in regards to the offensive scheme. And we got a question here concerning the tight end position.
The tight end position this year, I think probably 80% of the snaps will go to J.C. Chalk. And listen, this is an NFL built guy, and he's not a new guy. I think he's a redshirt junior or a redshirt sophomore. But he's been there for 3 years or so. He's 6'3", 260. Now the suspension of the other guy for he was one of the guys that tested positive for the Austrian last year, and so he's suspended. Now we have a couple of really young guys who I think will get some playing time. I know we have a true freshman coming in that was a highly recruited guy at that position. But I think that really there's only 2 guys that we can really depend on. But the main guy is going to be J.C. Chalk. He'll get the vast majority of the snaps at tight end.
All right, Clemson alum 98. Thank you so much for the question on the tight end position. And I want to let you know that here I have produced and posted Clemson offensive and defensive previews. So please check out those videos. All right. We've got somebody looking at the defense. Oh, yeah. 904 Hurricane. Concerns with the defense. Obviously, the losses are historic because I would argue that that was the greatest defensive line in the history of college football, both in regards to production, in terms of making plays on the field, producing championships, and just flat out winning like 90-some% of their games and winning 2 national championships. And then from an NFL talent standpoint, and that's been seen by the NFL draft. So you lose all that, plus some defections, 1 each basically from the secondary and linebacker that were huge. Where do you see the defense?
So the defense is going to do some shuffling around. I mean, we've moved Darian Kendrick from wide receiver to defensive back. He's going to be a starter at defensive back. This is going to be the first year, I'd say probably at least in the past 5 or 6 years, where the strength of our defense is and the depth of our defense is going to be from linebacker back, our cornerbacks, safeties, and linebackers. Now you have guys like Isaiah Simmons, who's listed as a safety, but he's going to play, I think, the vast majority of his snaps at linebacker. Let's just go down the list here. You got Isaiah Simmons, Tanner Muse, AJ Terrell, Darian Kendrick, Andrew Booth, Kavion Wallace. Those are all in the backfield. Balin Spector, Justin Foster, and the one that everybody's looking for at linebacker, who's supposedly going to be the breakout player at linebacker this year, is Jamie Skalski, I think is the way you pronounce his name. So that is definitely the deepest and probably best part of the defense. Now, as far as the defensive line goes, I've said this before and I'll say it again. We do not really have to replace talent, but our depth is going to be an issue at defensive line this year. But Niles Pinckney, a defensive tackle who's played a lot of games, he's going to probably be the centerpiece of that defensive line. And, of course, at defensive end, you've got a guy who I believe is going to be possibly the best defensive end in the country this year. I know it's a big statement, but if not, definitely one of the top 3, and that's Xavier Thomas. KJ Henry was redshirted last year. He's been putting on a lot of muscle and doing a lot of work. He'll make a big statement this year as well. And also Justin Maskell and Logan Rudolph also at defensive end. So there's a lot of players. I mean, they've been recruiting well. Obviously, Brent Venables knows what he's doing. And there's one thing about Brent Venables that it makes him a little bit different from a lot of defensive coordinators in the country, is that he recruits very versatile players, especially from linebacker back. And they switch around a lot. You'll see a lot of safety guys playing linebacker and vice versa. And so I think that you're not going to see that big of a drop off. There will be a drop off. You're not going to compare to last year's defense, but overall, I don't think that you're going to see that much of a drop off this year in production from the defense.
Love the Clemson conversation with Pigskin Pete. Join him on his YouTube channel again, Pigskin Pete. Just look him up right there, right here on YouTube, talking Clemson football all the time. And certainly join us right here. If you have yet to subscribe, check out the videos. I believe that you will dig in and find that we've got the best discussion, debate, and analysis each and every day on college football across the country. All right. Seth is on the line asking me. We'll ask Pigskin Pete, of course. Does Clemson go 12-0 again? Let me ask it like this, Pigskin, because I think I know what the answer to that question is. What is the one game, the first and foremost game that you were the most concerned about?
Well, you're splitting hairs. I'm going to say it's Texas A&M and Syracuse. I believe that Texas A&M is going to present a problem just because it's early in the year. And we have a lot of these, like we just mentioned, a lot of these inexperienced guys on the defensive line. But the fact that that's in Clemson, I think definitely favors Clemson. And so the Syracuse game on the road, we've seen the past 2 years that Syracuse is a handful. And listen, people like to make fun of Syracuse and make fun of their stadium. You know, it's not even a football stadium. It's a basketball stadium that they transition into a football stadium. But I call it the noise box because despite the fact there's only 40 to 45,000 people in there, it gets really loud. I'd say it's just as loud as any other college football stadium because it's indoors and the fans are right on top of you. And not to mention, let's be honest, one of my favorite coaches in the country is Dino Babers.
Yes.
If for some, let's play fantasy world here for a second. If for some reason tomorrow Dabo Swinney announced I'm retiring and I'm going to go right off in the sunset, if I could pick one single coach in the ACC to take his place, it would be Dino Babers. He's done more with less than just about anybody in the country. So I don't look past Syracuse. Now, I think we'll beat Syracuse. I'm not saying that, but those are probably the two big, the toughest games on their schedule, and they all occur within the first 3 weeks of the season.
Now, I do want to see Syracuse do it again because this was one season. It wasn't like they won 7, then 9, then 11, basically 4-8, 4-8. But you did see glimpses there. Obviously, they knocked off Clemson in a 4-8 season. They knocked off a top 25 Virginia Tech team the year before. You saw glimpses, and they stayed competitive against a Miami team the year before when they finished 4-8 on the road against a top 10 Miami team. So you saw the glimpses, and yeah, Dino Babers, I would love to see Syracuse sustain this and be competitive because of a number of things. I think Dino Babers is great for college football. He's an inspirational guy. It seems like he's really good to the kids. I like to see places like Boston College and Syracuse that have inherent disadvantages. So they're locked up there in the north, I'll say northeast, but upstate New York. They're in the cold. The best players in the country don't want to generally go there. They're playing in a decent football playing state, but nothing anywhere close to what the other teams in the ACC, most of the other teams in the ACC have right in their backyard. So Dino Babers has to sell people to come up there, and he's never going to get top 5 recruiting classes. So he's got to live with recruiting classes maybe that he can take from what have been in the 60s and make them more in the 40s, and then work with that and do what we've seen at Wisconsin and Michigan State and Kansas State and places like that. I do think that they benefited from a weak ACC last year. The schedule was not daunting. So that for them to sustain it while the likes of Wake and Boston College are on their level, and then Florida State should eclipse them again. I would love to see him sustain it where it's difficult to expect him to win 10 games every year, but if he's winning 7 or 8 every year, and then he cycles in every so often where he could really challenge Clemson, would be fun and interesting and just kind of different from what we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people think that the past couple of years were sort of a fluke for Syracuse. I don't think it really is a fluke. Yeah, they played in a weak conference and a weaker schedule, but I could still see them winning 9 or 10 games this year based on the state of the ACC. And I promise you, despite what any other team and any other conference says, they would not look forward to lining up against Syracuse. Now, even teams that are better and probably should beat them, they could get knocked off. I promise.
Yeah, and the evidence is right there against Clemson the last 2 years. They won one of the games. They came within a 4th and 6 of pulling off an upset in Death Valley. It's astonishing what they've been able to do against that specific team 2 years in a row. Unfortunately for them, they're not going to be able to sneak up on Clemson this year.
No.
If Clemson knows about anyone this year, they should know about Syracuse. Okay, it's the Syracuse week. It's suddenly like Syracuse week is something for Clemson, just to make sure that they get out of there alive and don't come home with an L, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. They still take care of business elsewhere, and they could win the Atlantic Division and still reach their ultimate goal, which leads me to the biggest wild card in the conference. One of the biggest wild cards in the country, to me, is Florida State.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I'm not going to pile on Willie Taggart too much. He inherited a mess. The biggest problem with Florida State last year, obviously they had one of the most talented teams in the country, talented rosters, but just the undisciplined type of play that they played with, the penalties, the penalties as far as personal fouls after the plays were over. that ultimately comes down to culture and coaching. I mean, they had a lot of big time penalties with substitutions, just little stupid things. Now, they didn't play great either, but I'm not going to pin all of that on Willie Taggart. I think that he probably had a lot of players left over from Jimbo Fisher who had a sour taste in their mouth, who really, quite honestly, maybe didn't want to be at Florida State anymore, and maybe didn't even want to play for Willie Taggart. So I'm going to give him another year or two before I really pass judgment on him, but he's got a long way to go, man. I know he made a lot of coaching changes, and we'll see what they can do this year. They can't get worse than they were last year. I mean, if they're worse than they are last year, I think that Willie Taggart might be gone, even though he might not deserve to be. But if he can put together 7 or 8 wins somehow this year, then I think that that's a good sign for Florida State's future with Willie Taggart.
So we've got Clemson Alum 98 on the live chat. We've got DeAndre. I don't know if any of these other folks are Clemson fans that I see currently on the live chat, but certainly as this video posts, we'll have tons of Clemson fans. So I want you to kind of answer this question along with Pigskin Pete. This seems like a ridiculous question. Do you get sick of winning? But let me frame it this way, especially within this conference. It's not like you're going toe-to-toe with Ohio State or Alabama or Oklahoma every year at the end, and like Ohio State has against Michigan and Alabama against Georgia and the like. Oklahoma the last couple of years when Texas has raised its game. And it's almost been a foregone conclusion, and it's getting worse from a national perspective. From your perspective, it's getting better. The separation, would you like to see? Sure, you want to always lay down the hammer and when it's all said and done, be the one, but it would be nice to see some dust that had to settle for that to happen. Like it was like 2013, 14, 15, 16 with Florida State, Clemson. At least we had one game to look forward to and say, who's going to win that game because they're the class of the ACC. Now it's like, okay, let's wait for the college football playoff.
Well, no, first of all, I never get tired of the winning. I would like to see the ACC get better because I think it's better for college football when teams like Miami and Florida State and Virginia Tech are, a relevant team and ranked in the top 15 or 25 at least. But I think that Clemson gets a lot of unfair criticism when it comes to their schedule, because if you look at 3 years ago, 2016, they had the number one toughest schedule in the country, according to ESPN and Fox and everybody else. They beat 3 ranked teams, 3 top 15 teams in the month of September on the way to winning the national championship that year with Deshaun Watson. They do not shy away in the non-conference schedule from playing the big boys. It's always a big boy SEC school. We're not playing against Missouri or Arkansas or Vanderbilt. We schedule Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Georgia. These are all teams that we've either played recently a lot or we're going to play in the next couple of years. Notre Dame next year out of conference, even though I consider that to be an ACC school. That's a whole nother conversation. So Clemson is a victim of their own winning, because a lot of the downfall of some of these ACC schools has been because Clemson has really taken over and gotten those coaches run out. Do you think that Jimbo Fisher really would have left if he hadn't been behind the 8 ball with Clemson? And he may have, but he couldn't beat Clemson anymore, and he saw a better opportunity in the SEC and got a lot of money and went there. But look, Clemson does not shy away. They don't care who they play on any given day. They're just like Alabama, Ohio State, or Oklahoma. They're going to show up and play, whether it's Syracuse or Alabama. They're going to play with the same amount of fire, and they're just going to beat people. And that's just the way it is. So people, they love to hate on Clemson's schedule, but it's not Clemson's fault. And they, like I said, they go out of their way to schedule big boy schools out of conference.
Absolutely. It's been Georgia in recent years. And again, the home and home with Texas A&M and other teams down the line. And they're actually going to double up on some of these years of playing really good teams. And they always have South Carolina. They can't control how good the Gamecocks are. That game needs to be played. South Carolina won 11 games 3 years in a row not that long ago, and they're decent right now. Pigskin, I'm going to broaden that question out because obviously you being a Clemson guy, you're not going to get bored of that. But for as much as I love this sport and the product on the field is amazing, and I love the tradition, the pageantry, all of that is beyond anything else in sports. But it's been like in the Big Ten, it's been longer than this, but about 5 years across the board. Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson. And then they have their challenger of Texas, Georgia, Michigan, Clemson, no one, Florida State for a while, but they beat them all the time. And that's what it's been for like 5 years. in 4 of the 5 major conferences. Locked down.
Yeah. So are you saying, do I like
are
that?
you bored of that? Wouldn't it be nice to see a college football take yourself out of the Clemson realm for just a second? If we saw a college football playoff that was, I don't know, Wisconsin, Oregon, even Georgia, and Virginia this year, or at least 2 of them.
Yeah, as a
one
fan,
of them.
I would love to see a change up. Now, listen, there's 4 spots in the playoffs, so I don't want to see Clemson be knocked out of that equation. But that leaves 3 other teams that I would love to see rotate. I mean, listen, I have Oregon as my dark horse to make the playoffs this year because I'm a big believer in their offense and their quarterback and the way they've been recruiting and their schedule. So that I would love to see Oregon be in the playoffs. Texas, maybe get somebody else other than Oklahoma in the Big 12 in there. I'm not a big fan of Michigan. I've had my run-in with Michigan fans, and I think I don't know who hates who more. I don't know if they hate me more, if I hate Michigan more, but it might be a wash. But listen, Penn State, Nebraska, maybe in the next couple of years, sure, absolutely. I would love to see a little bit of turnover in college football. As a fan, listen, being serious, even if Clemson wasn't in the playoffs this year, I would like to see some new faces in there just as a fan, for sure.
Because, again, it's not just the same teams making the playoff. It's the same 1 or 2 teams being left out just below the line. It's the same teams being under consideration every year. Sure, we've got the Notre Dame, we got the Washington, we've got a few that have slipped through, but basically that's been the talk. The talk has been about 5 or 6 teams every year for 5 years. Pigskin, before we let you go, you alluded to Notre Dame. So I need to hear the take on Notre Dame's status in the ACC because I think the arrangement is ridiculous. I've posted videos, folks. If you want to hear me rant about it, look up ACC Notre Dame. You will find it on my channel. I have things to say about it, but this is Pigskin's time.
Oh, you're really trying to get me worked up here, aren't you? I hate it. And you know what? This is not Notre Dame's fault. This is the ACC's fault for letting this happen. There's no other conference in America that would allow a school like Notre Dame to join their conference in every other sport but remain independent in football and then play basically an 80% ACC schedule, go out there and beat up on the lower ACC tier teams. The ACC does not see a single dollar from that revenue that Notre Dame's generating. And then, of course, it diminishes the ACC's record when Notre Dame goes out and beats up on Wake Forest and Georgia Tech or whoever. So this is the ACC's problem. Can you fault Notre Dame for this? They've got the sweetest deal in the world. It's not going to be until the ACC tells them either join us or we're not going to schedule you that they'll quit. Because I don't think that the Big 10 or the Big 12, which is geographically most likely where they would fall if the ACC nixed that deal, they wouldn't make that deal with them, and they would be forced at that point, in my opinion, to join a conference. Now, I do think it's just a matter of time before they join a conference because they're not going to go 12-0 every year. And without that conference championship game, they're going to be left out as an 11-1 team once or twice before the fan base says, all right, you know what, we really got to change something here because we can't be left out of the playoffs every year.
Well, certainly the Big Ten would only take Notre Dame for one reason, to play football games. That would be the one reason the Big Ten. They don't care about Notre Dame otherwise. And Notre Dame obviously doesn't care to join the Big Ten. They went to the ACC, but that would be the only reason. They have longstanding rivalries with Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue, and they sit right in the middle of Big Ten country geographically.
Yeah, I for the life of me, I can't understand why the ACC is doing this, except for maybe to get a little bit of clout by playing somebody like Notre Dame every year. But again, it's a one-sided deal, in my opinion, and the ACC is getting the raw end of the deal.
Pigskin Pete, join his channel right here on YouTube. Pigskin Pete, look him up, talking Clemson football, and he doesn't hold back one bit. Pigskin, we appreciate you stopping by. It's always a good time.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure.
For everybody else, lock it in right here. We'll be coming your way with all sorts of media days coverage, position previews, and schedule rankings, and more right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thanks for joining us.